Well, good afternoon. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with you. Some exciting things going on the House floor. As I'm sure you heard, the National Defense Authorization Act passed overwhelmingly, which is good news. Lots of great things in there for our Navy and Marine Corps, including things like the RCOH for CVN-73, upgrading 2 cruisers, building 3 new LCSs, building LPD-28. So Joe talked about amphibious ships. We got that amphibious ship element into the NDAA, so good things. So it heads back over to the Senate, hopefully to be put on the agenda this afternoon, hopefully to be voted on by early next week, so we can get this piece of the puzzle put together. And then next is hopefully getting out a appropriations bill sometime next week, and that looks like it's on track in some shape or form. Don't ask me what it will look like, but I do believe that we will have something that comes out and gets things done. I would like to see something in the longer term, especially for national defense. I think the uncertainty of CRs and funding our national defense, we've all seen the downside of that. But I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you today and kind of give you an overview about where we see things going. Obviously, the big issue after we get appropriations done this year is sequester next year, and then what should we be putting forth in our efforts to bring our fleet back up to where it needs to be. Where we are today is certainly not where we want to be, especially as you look at our adversaries around the world. You look at what China's doing, you look at what Russia's doing. We've got to catch up as far as shipbuilding, and that means we have to be building more ships than what we're retiring. We have to have a shipbuilding budget that reflects that. As Congressman Courtney talked about, we have to make sure we're focusing on across all ship classes. It's good that this year's NDAA stakes out a different area to fund SSB&X outside the shipbuilding budget. That's great. But now the next step is to put some money in that account, because if not, we still have a gap between SSB&X availabilities and Ohio-class retirements. And we are going to be at 11 subs under the current rate. Now the question is can we move that far enough to the left to make sure we don't have a gap to move below the 12 sub requirement? That's going to be a challenge. I talked to Admiral Richardson and others about how do we accomplish that, but the only way we accomplish that is to make sure that we get money in that account. It's good that we've separated from the shipbuilding account, but now it's a requirement that we actually get some dollars in there and have that discussion with our appropriators. We also have to make sure, too, we're looking at other elements of the fleet. I am very happy that we're going to be building LPD-28. I think it's a great opportunity for us to use LPD-28 as the bridge to LXR, to have that as the effort to essentially have it as a first ship in the class to determine how do we put together LXR and how do we bring down the cost on LPD. I know Secretary Steckling and others are working on that, to have that as the bridge to LXR, keep the industrial base warm, keep those efforts going, learn from that ship, and make sure we take the lessons learned as far as developing LXR. So I'm excited about that. I think the appropriators, too, will follow suit to make sure that that happens and to make sure that we keep that on track. Obviously, too, we're looking at our, not just the LPD part of our amphibious fleet, but making sure, too, that we are keeping up with ship maintenance across all classes. That becomes a big issue, too. If we're going to make sure that our ships live out their expected service lives, we got to make sure they get to the yard and that we take care of them. We know that retiring ships early, when we see a shipbuilding rate, at least as we exist today, being less than what we are retiring ships, we got to take care of the ships that we have. And we see, too, with our adversaries that, they are launching headfirst into building ships that get to be comparable to ours. When China looks at building nuclear submarines and nuclear aircraft carriers, there's only one purpose behind that, and that's to compete with the United States and have a worldwide presence. So we have to work hard to make sure we maintain our superiority on the high seas, and that requires that we put the necessary effort and the necessary funding along those lines. Now, the debate needs to take place about our shipbuilding budget, and Congressman Forbes and I and Congressman Courtney and others have had discussions about where do we go to get our shipbuilding budget above the $16 billion mark. We can't get to where we need to be by putting $16 billion in the shipbuilding budget. No matter how good a job we do in bringing the cost of ships down, there's only a certain place that you can get with the economies there. And there's only a certain number of ships that you can build at that level. Then the discussion becomes, how do we get more money into the shipbuilding budget? I'd like to see us get at least $2 billion additional each year into the shipbuilding budget. Now, I know Ron O'Rourke says it really takes about $4 billion more, but I'd like for us to take the first step. If we can get $2 billion, I would be very, very happy with that. Then the discussion takes place is, where does that come from? Obviously, sequester is part of that. How do we raise the top line for overall defense spending, making sure that then we carve out that money to go in the shipbuilding budget, but also, too, and I know the other service branches are very competitive about the share of the defense budget that they receive, but if we're looking at forward presence and where the needs are, the discussion about one-third, one-third, one-third also needs to come into play about how we direct resources within the DoD budget. And I understand that gained some attention from our friends in the Army and the Air Force, but it's a reality of us having forward presence, and the way you do that is to have ships. We had a little bit of a discussion in the Readiness Subcommittee as well as the full committee about what readiness truly is, and obviously it's training and equipping. And I made an argument with somebody that said, listen, ships aren't readiness, and I said, listen, unless we have trained sailors and Marines to walk on water, ships are readiness. So I want to make sure that we have those ships out there for our sailors and for our Marines to be able to accomplish the missions that they have before them. And in today's world, where we see the Marine Corps coming out of a land war and going back to sea as an amphibious force, we have to think very strongly about making sure that we devote the resources to make sure we have an amphibious fleet capable of providing for the requirements that we have before us today. And nobody has advocated in changing the requirements, which means we have an obligation to make sure we meet those requirements. So obviously a number of challenges for us, but I still think the glass is half full. I still think that we have the greatest Navy the world's ever known, although it gets stretched awfully thin at times. But I want to make sure that we're on track. I think Admiral Locklear is right. As I talked to him, he said, Rob, if our Navy goes down to 260 ships, we'll go from being a superpower to a regional power. And I want to make sure that we're reversing that trend and that we're back to building more ships than what we're retiring. This year, as Mr. Courtney said, is a good first step in that direction. Now, we have forced the issue on some places where next year it's going to be very challenging for us to make sure we continue that effort. But the only way we force those decisions is to make these types of moves. So we have to do that. And I know folks say, well, where's the money coming for this and where's the money coming for that? Well, that's up to Congress to make sure we get that done. And it's up to us to make sure that we have that discussion. So I'm looking forward to that and looking forward to make sure that we get the job of the nation done, that we get our fleet to where it needs to be. And all you have to do is to look around the world at the challenges we have, and you see that they are many, and you see that, as General Odierno said, he doesn't see peace breaking out around the world, and none of us see that, and we see that forward presence is how we have to make sure that we have that deterrence. And I believe, too, that as we talk about all the strategy, we talk about the tactics, it's all about what we do to be able to project force. But I argue, too, that as powerful, if not more powerful a force, is the force of deterrence. And I believe in Ronald Reagan's adage of peace through strength, and I believe that you avoid war by making sure that people don't see opportunities and that they don't look at our force and say, you know what, there's a place where we can take advantage of a weakness there. So I believe that the investment that we make in this nation's Navy and in our Marine Corps, and obviously additionally in our Army and our Air Force, is an investment in keeping the world safe. Because as the U.S. military goes, so does the world. And it's very clear as we have an opportunity to travel around. I just got back from visiting our forces in Afghanistan, just got back too from meeting with King Abdullah in Jordan about what we're doing with ISIS. And folks around the world still look at the U.S. as the go-to nation. Now obviously, there's only so much that you can go to the United States. But the Arab world is beginning to realize, and I think King Abdullah has it correctly, where he said that the effort to defeat ISIS has to have an Arab face, and it has to be an Arab and Muslim effort. And he put it very succinctly. He said, this is a timely battle of good versus evil. And he said the Arab world needs to choose. Are you on the side of good or are you on the side of evil? And if you're on the side of good, you need to take part in this fight to make sure that ISIS is defeated. And the perspective has to be broader. I think he also has it right when he talks about it's not just ISIS. It's other extremist groups in places like Eastern Africa, in other areas in the Middle East, and that if we don't look overall in the Arab nations, the Arab and Muslim world don't look overall about what they are going to do as part of this partnership to defeat this extremism everywhere that we find it, that we will find a much more dangerous world. And unfortunately, the balance towards evil will continue to move in that direction if the forces of good don't push back and defeat evil. So I think he has it right. He was with us again yesterday, and he's been a real leader in the Arab world to make sure those nations are coming together to help the United States. And certainly this needs to be an effort, as he said, that has an Arab face on it, and that in the long term has Arab nations as part of keeping these forces of evil from developing and taking over in certain areas here in the Middle East. And again, that goes back to our capability and what we can do, not just there, but also in places like the Asia Pacific, because we have partners there. As I've gone to travel there and visited with folks, had a chance to go out to RIMPAC and see the great exercises that took place there. We see the need for a strong U.S. presence there and strong U.S. partnerships, and those nations look to us to make sure that we are standing by our word, that when we talk about a rebalance to the Asia Pacific, as I've spoken with those nations, folks like Prime Minister Abe and others, they said, okay, we hear you saying rebalance to the Pacific, but we're looking and we're not seeing a whole lot of follow to the words. So let's get a little better indication about what the United States is going to do. And that, again, awful lot of ocean out there in the Pacific to cover, and the way we rebalance is to make sure we have that presence there. And I want to make sure that we are more than just a mile wide and an inch deep. So we've got our work cut out for us, but again, we still have the greatest military the world's ever known, defending the greatest nation the world's ever known. So the glass is still half full. We've been through these times before. We've had to make some challenging decisions, and we've always made the right decision, and we will make the right decisions again. But again, with your help and guidance and with your thoughts and ideas about how we actually accomplish that. So it's a great honor and privilege for me to be here with you today to give you a little bit of perspective and how we see the issues before our military and before our Navy and Marine Corps. And I'd love to take a few questions if you have time, if that's within the agenda. I've got a few minutes if you'd like to do that. Sure. Yeah.
Got a question right here. Sure. We've asked people to go to the mic so we can.
Sure.
Am I live? Okay.
Yes.
Congressman Sandy Swarzbach from the Air Warfare Center at China Lake. There's been a lot of talk all day, and thank you for coming and sharing your insight with us. But as we've talked all day about increasing shipbuilding, increasing building the platforms, when they get there, they better have something to shoot.
That's right.
And there hasn't been a lot of discussion about the development of weapons systems and integrating those systems into those ships that we're going to build. We've spent a lot of time neglecting new weapons development. And yeah, I'd like to have photon torpedoes too, but until then, I'll take HARM improvements or Harpoon improvements or Tomahawk improvements.
Yeah.
Are we addressing those budget issues?
You know, we have to. It was great. On my way in this morning, I actually stopped and met with the research and development group that's there at Dalgar Naval Support Facility. A lot of great work going on there with directed energy, with spectrum dominance, with the railgun, with electronic warfare. I mean, there's some amazing work that's going on there. The key with readiness, you know, we're ramping up the training element, which is good. We're getting folks to that hands-on training. The equipping effort, though, includes modernization. And what happens is we redirect resources within readiness to making sure that everybody gets up-to-date training. Where does the money come from? It comes from modernization. So as we talk about sequestration, we have to make sure we understand that if we don't backfill pretty quickly the dollars that come out of R&D for modernization, then I don't care the training, you can do all the training in the world, but if we don't have the superiority with our weapon system, then we lose ground. And let me tell you, our adversaries are working on directed energy programs. They're working on things like the railgun. And I have argued this, that across the spectrum within DOD, there needs to be a prioritization, a modernization of weapon systems. And we need to say, listen, do we need right now to make sure we update the Harpoon or update the Tomahawk? And if we do, what should be the priority? What should be first? What should be second? How do we make sure we do these things? Because as you know, even if you had the money, you can't direct all the money at one time in one place and be effective with it. So we've got to have a plan to say these are the priorities about what we modernize, when we do it, and understand when that modernization will take place, and understand where the risks are if we don't modernize. So that will be one of our pushes in the upcoming Congress about how we direct resources to make sure modernization takes place. Because we can have the best trained pilots and sailors in the world, but you know, if the weapon systems they have are antiquated, then we're not in good shape. So.
Congressman, two questions. Do you see a role for U.S., you have Hampton Roads and the shipbuilders down there, role for export of U.S. Ships and more weapon systems? And the second question, you talked about the U.S. Navy and its global positioning around the world. What's your opinion of smart power and the role the U.S. Navy plays in smart power around the world?
Sure. Well, I think smart power is certainly a wave of the future. There's a lot of things that we have to address with smart power. One of the areas that I believe we still need to develop, we've done a lot in the cyber realm to make sure we're maintaining at least situational awareness there. My concern is this, both in the industrial side with industrial espionage, the money that goes into developing systems, if that gets stolen, and don't think that our adversaries aren't trying every day to steal that stuff. Secondly is, how do we make sure that we have not only an effort to defend the systems where we store information and where we develop, but also what do we do as far as making sure that there's a deterrent to the other side, and that is making sure we're taking up some of their time and effort in them defending their systems. And I know there's a lot of hesitancy to say, what should the rules of engagement be, and we don't want to escalate things by doing this, that, or the other. But there was a good article today about what the Chinese are doing. If we just charge members of the Chinese military with cyber espionage, that doesn't do what we need to do. So we have got to be more mindful about what we do, not just to protect our systems, but what do we do to create a deterrence? What do we do to make sure that people understand that, the things that they're doing are things that we're doing? And there's arguments about some of the things we're doing are indeed equal to what the Chinese are doing. I don't see it that way. I think there's a lot more that we need to do within that particular realm to make sure that we are, again, asserting ourselves in that domain and making sure that we have tactical overmatch at the very least, hopefully tactical dominance in that realm, and we can't be hesitant. And I understand not wanting to get into that, and a lot of times too the lawyers get involved, and then things really get convoluted. But I understand the reality of what we're dealing with there, and we have to not be hesitant in those realms. So I want to make sure we're doing that. Okay, sure.
Okay, I think that's it, sir. Any questions?
Okay, thank you. Pete, thank you very much.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Want to give you
Oh,
this
yeah.
book, Jim Stavridis' book.
Oh, Jim,
Accidental
that is
Animal.
great.
He's not the accident, but he thought that going to UCOM was an accident. But thank you, sir, for coming out today.
Thank you, Pete.
For your
Thank you.
support for the cause throughout the year.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for what you all do. Please stay in touch with us. I tell folks the solutions that we need to the challenges we face don't exist solely within that, 50,000 square feet of fantasy land we call the Capitol. They exist out here in the real world. So thanks again. We
Thank you
appreciate it.
again.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.